Welcome back, Fourth Nation. You're listening live to Family Mix Mondays with your host, Jaketra Bryant.
Welcome back, Source Nation. Again, I am your host, Jaketra Bryant, and you're listening to Family Mix Mondays. So as I stated before the break, we are capping our series of factors that break up families. And our special guest tonight is Dr. David Heiber. And so let me tell you a little bit about him before he joins me. So Dr. David Heiber is a passionate educational keynote speaker delivering powerful speeches that inspire and motivate the audience. He provides strategies and tips that can be applied to life immediately. David has presented to and worked with schools, universities, and organizations across the nation. With David's humorous and down-to-earth style, he's able to connect with any audience. However, David's passion is working with young people, specifically the African American and Latino males. In addition to speaking engagements, David is the founder of Concentric Educational Solutions, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit organization that provides student support services. As the founder of Concentric, David has collaborated and consulted with over 100 schools across 20 states. So I believe we do have Dr. Heiber in the studio. Welcome, Dr. Heiber, to Family Mix Mondays. Thank you so much for being here.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. So before we get started with our conversation, so tell us, Source Nation, a little bit more about you and what you actually do.
Yeah, so similar to what you said in the introduction, we work with schools and specifically directly with families and the communities to really break down the barriers that prevent students from achieving. And, you know, many of the schools and school districts that we work with in urban areas, the students face complex challenges, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. And we try to work specifically with the families and the students to get strategies not just from our perspective, but from their perspective, and really try to hear what they're saying and align and bring that information back to the schools and really give the support that they need. And so we've been doing this now for over 7 years, and we're finding out a lot, and a lot of the things that we thought was true aren't. And quite frankly, because we haven't been listening to students, and the more that we listen to them, and hear their stories, the better we're able to help them.
Wow, I love it. And I especially love what you said about finally listening to the students. And that is exactly the platform that we're doing this evening. So Source Nation, again, if you're tuning in, you're listening to Family Mix Mondays, and I'm your host, Jaketra Bryant. And today my special guest is Dr. David Heiber, and we are putting a cap onto the series of factors that break up families. So the phone lines are open, and if you would like to ask Dr. Heiber a question or myself, the number to dial in is 924-0933, and you press option 1. Again, that number is 619-924-0933 and press option 1. So, Dr. Heiber, you're our final cap to this series of factors that break up families. And this is a series where we've been discussing just taking a look at families, taking a look at, like, within the homes, the role of the parents, the role of students, the role that social workers, to clinicians, to teachers, that we all play when it comes to what's breaking our families apart. And so I think I want to start with just what you said. When you started listening to the students, then you noticed that the results changed. So let's jump in and we'll get started here. And so what were some of the things that students were actually saying that was playing a role into just why they felt like they weren't successful?
Yeah, I mean, the framework that we use, or I guess the vehicle that we use, is really has been popularized by Freeman Hrabowski. And for everybody, all your listeners out there, Dr. Freeman Hrabowski, president of University of Maryland, Baltimore County, has been doing this work since the early 70s, and he is one of the foremost educators in the country. And the accolades that he's received are too numerous to mention. But one of the things that he's always said, and it works with his Meyerhoff program, is ALA, and it's really ask, listen, act. And the reason that he takes that position is he feels, and all his research has stated this, is that too often we ask a question not to listen to the answers, but to validate what we think we should be doing, and we act right away. And he's saying the key ingredient is we really have to listen. And so as we've been going into the homes, listening to students and families from their perspective, one of the things that they're saying, whether they're bored in school or not challenged in school, or that the schools don't have the supports and the interventions that they need, is that we have got to get away from the one-size-fits-all for social-emotional support. I think we've done that really well with specificity with academics. And we know that we have to differentiate instruction because there's different type of learners, but we also have to take that approach for students for their social-emotional health, and that it cannot be a one-size-fits-all, and that we can't think, or if we do, it's usually we're erroneous in this approach, is that we think that it's a one-size-fits-all. It's not. We're dealing with human beings who, we're all very complex, and, things that should make sense don't always make sense. So, just because you do A doesn't mean you're going to get B and then get C. Sometimes you may do A and B and have to go all the way back to X or Y, and that's okay. And because we all grow and we all need support differently and at different times. And whether it's from the students who are saying we have to accommodate them differently because they have competing responsibilities. A lot of the stories that we're hearing from our home visits is, of course I want to go to school, but I can't give 7 to 8 hours of school. I have to do it differently because I have to go to work. I have to feed and take care of my younger siblings, or I have to take care of my grandmother. And instead of trying to just fit students in one box, we really need to think differently.
Yeah, I agree. I love the analogy of the ask. What was it again? Like A what?
ALA. Ask, listen, and then act.
I love it. ALA. I'm going to have to use that in my sessions. So I love that, especially because I love that because especially like as parents or just as clinicians or just sometimes as people, we're so busy with our own selves and our own agendas that we don't stop to ask, like, how is my place in this world affecting other people? Or what the things that I do and how it affects other people. So something small is just asking, like, how your day is going or what do you need. It's very, very
Absolutely.
Simple. And that's what it sounds like. That's the approach that y'all took. Like, hey, let me just ask them, what do you need? What is going on? What are you struggling with? And taking those few minutes to wait on a response.
Yeah, so part of our home visit framework, and, home visits are nothing new. Home visits have been going on for a long, long time, and particularly when African-American teachers lived in the communities of their students, they could go right down literally right down the street. But since, a lot of times we've moved, as educators, we don't necessarily live in the community that we service. It's this new wave thing around home visits. But what we've kind of done with our model is when we go into the homes, we don't try to solve the issues. But I think it would be, we found that when we try to just jump right in there and solve the issues, we're not getting to the core challenges. So the very first time that we go in there, we just ask questions and we let them talk. And based upon some of their responses, we might ask some more probing questions. But we always come back with, we're going to take this information back to the school, and together we can try to work on these challenges. It's never trying to solve in that immediate moment. And I think that's where a lot of times, even though we have good intentions as educators or as schools, we try to immediately solve the problems. And these problems are very complex, and they're deeply rooted in the families and communities. And we can't just solve them in one session. It's going to be a process.
Right. That's where the whole platform of, I'm so glad you're on the final day of it, because that is exactly where the platform came from, is just factors that break up families. There's too many times that we try to create like quick fixes for things that we don't take the time to actually look at, like, how do we get this far? And so I'm so glad that that is something that your particular foundation decided to look deeper into, that, hey, maybe there are some outside things that are associated with why this child is struggling with reading, or why this child is coming to school and they are distracted or fighting in the classrooms or something like that. And so I'm glad that that's something your foundation found. Did you find that there were some differences in, like, age range, like with the kids that were, let's see, kind of more on the spectrum of, I guess let me put it this way. Maybe was there, like, a higher age group that seemed to be more highly affected by some, breakage in, like, schoolwork success?
Yeah, most of our home visits are focused on students from anywhere from seventh grade, usually sixth grade sometimes, but usually seventh grade all the way up. So, for example, this weekend we did a home visit of a student who was 20 years old. He was only 2 credits short of graduating, but he has been out of school for 2 years. He has not attended a school for 2 years, although he was on a school roster. And this had actually been the first physical outreach, that the school system had attempted to try to figure out what this young person needed. And as we were having conversation, he had gone through some challenges with the criminal justice system, or juvenile justice system, and when he came back, there was not a really good transition plan for him, and he just kind of floated out there. And as we been doing this work for the past 7 years, he is not an anomaly. And so what we did was we brought that information back to the school system and said, look, this is a young man who's 20 years old. He's only 2 credits, but only 30 days away from his 21st birthday. Let's try to figure out something where we don't have to sit him into a classroom for 6-7 hours a day, because he's not going to do it. Where we can get him the credits that he needs. Let's get him graduated and link him to something, some type of post-secondary education, whether it be a trade or something else. And I mean that is the approach that we should be taking more aggressively. Is that, and this is something we're finding across the board as well, is our educational system is really antiquated. If you look around the world, the educational systems are very dynamic. They're flexible to meet the needs of diverse learners, not just from an academic standpoint, but from a support standpoint, except here in America, where we're consistently trying to fit into this one particular box.
Yeah. I'm glad that you use him as an example, because most of the time when we are talking about education, for some reason our thoughts immediately go to elementary education. And now those students do get very lost, but I think it was very, very important that what you did for that young man, or your organization did for that young man, and how it opened the eyes of, hey, it's not just our elementary kids who get affected, and, like, we need to take a look at some factors within the homes, but, like, these elementary kids grow up, and they still are falling through the cracks. So I think that was really, really important, and I think that shows that, hey, like, again, like you have to really, really take a look at, like, how do we get to this point, and what are going to be some of our real solutions. And so I like that. It's very complex. I mean, because every home visit, every opportunity to have a conversation face to face with a student or with a caregiver, parent, guardian, whatever the case may be, we're constantly learning, and it becomes this tapestry of a narrative of where it's reaffirming the fact that we have got to do things differently for students across the board. And the more that we're learning about this, the more resources then we can bring back, or the more information we can bring back to align and identify the resources that these young people need. And we have got to be a learning organization. Every school district that we work with, we're constantly trying to say the same thing. We've got to be this dynamic learning organization to consistently adapt to the various needs of our students. If not, we're going to lose them. And it's not the hard dropout that we always focus on. Well, this student dropped out. It's the gradual fade out that each year they slowly disengage from the school district, and as they disengage, we're losing them more and more. But there's telltale signs there. There's indicators if we pay attention. A lot of times we're just not paying attention. Yeah. So what do you think is some of the particular things that you started to see with the trends that actually stem from, like, back inside the homes?
Well, a lot of times the young people are forced, and I don't think that this has been a huge change as far as new problems coming about, I think the depth and the amount of problems that young people have to deal with at such an early age. I mean, because they're exposed to so much at an earlier age, much more than even, I mean, I'll be 41 next month. And so there's certain things I was exposed to and a lot of things I wasn't exposed to until age appropriate, whether it be, in the homes or, through social media that didn't exist back then, or through television or whatever the case may be, or with my peer groups, that our kids have got to deal with complex issues now when they're not cognitively even developed to deal with these complex issues that adults have challenges facing. And that's what we're seeing. We're constantly seeing young people having to be faced with processing a lot of information that adults have.
That's a really good point. And so I see that trend as well. So we have where back when I was growing up, because I'm within kind of sort of your age range, but I think the most technology, not that far off, within the most technology we had was that Mario Brothers Nintendo game and maybe a Nokia phone and a pager, but that was the most technology that we had. And so there was no distractions. There was no technology is teaching us or something else is holding our interest. And I think that's really, really important for family members and the listeners to really know that, hey, you may be actually giving your kid, proper education, putting them in a great school system, but you still are responsible for, what's also being fed into them. And so I think, taking a look at the technology side of things is, really important.
One of the things that has helped me become a better educator or a more diverse educator is that I have my youngest son will be 10 next month, and my daughter is 11. And just the things that they're exposed to at a young age that I never would have been exposed to. And this is across the spectrum. And they live in a pretty sheltered community, a pretty sheltered family, and they're still exposed to a whole lot. And both myself and my wife, we are educated, but we have a hard time managing everything that they're exposed to as well. So you think about families who where the parents have to work 3 or 4 jobs or 2 or 3 jobs, not to exaggerate, and they have to balance all these responsibilities at the same time raising the whole child, which is a challenge. And raising healthy, emotionally stable children is a constant challenge.
Mm-hmm. It truly takes that village. It really does. But I can agree, as a person who now hosts a show, have my own business, see clients, it is. I had to, prior to coming on, I was like, hey, give me your iPad, because I can't monitor right now, so I don't know what you're going to be watching, so I need to take it up. And so it really is. And those things actually do play a role, because unfortunately those things are more enticing to the kid than a new math problem or learning the latest in calculus. And so those things play a role. And like you said, they're probably not dropping out, but the kids are fading away because other things are beginning to hold the interest of the kids.
Yes.
And
Very
so,
true.
so the educational system has definitely, changed. And so I love foundations like yours and some of the other guests that I had on this month that also started, different foundations where they try to include the family back in so that we actually can help win our young youth and adults back over to really being good citizens, being educators themselves, and everybody looking at the role that they play.
One situation that I went through as I was kind of growing up in all this is that, and they use this saying in the criminal justice system. They always talk about rehabilitation, but it's really hard to be rehabilitated if you've never been habilitated. So it's really hard to be a good parent if you've never received good parenting or well-rounded. Let me say more. I think it's more appropriate to say well-rounded parenting. So a lot of our limitations as parents are generational. That a lot of times we're just giving back to our children what we've been given by our parents. And if our parents were not really well-rounded, then we're not raising well-rounded children. And we just keep passing it on. And so we have got to make a conscious decision at some point to get the skills or acquire the skills or build the skill set to raise well-rounded children. And it's a constant struggle.
I agree. That's that cycle that is just so unspoken, because that takes some huge accountability to say, you know what, wait, I play a role as to how this family has been going. And
yes,
there's a portion of it that came from my grandmother. And so I think, like, one thing a lot of black families may struggle with is blaming. And so it's so hard to be like, well, I know, like, my parenting or it may be a little off, but my mom did the best she can do with the best she had. And so I think a lot of times people feel bad almost. That's the best term I got. Yeah, they feel bad. They feel bad if they were to say that, like, you're the reason that I kind of parent like this and that my child is doing these things. But if that's the reality, is if that's a part of the factor, that's a part of the factor. You can't solve anything
it is
until
a
you
part of the
actually
narrative.
address the problem. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, it's a part of the narrative. So one of the things, and you're right, it's not where we're putting our parents down or anything like that. In many cases, they did do the best that they can. However, they were limited. They were limited to what they were taught. They were limited to their time period. And we each generation we have an opportunity to do better. And so what we have to try to do, for example, if your family, if a family has a history of yelling and they just pass it down from generation to generation, then we're talking to our children, ask our children why they're yelling. Well, that's because they're just repeating what they've been taught, and it just keeps going back and back. It keeps going back each generation. At some point, we have got to make a conscious decision to stop it.
Right. I agree. And so I think, like, just being more mindful. I had a client today who actually was speaking of this very same thing. When I asked her about I was like, how are things in the house? And she said, you know what, I've came to the conclusion that my dad doesn't know how to do anything but just be. And she was like, she said, so I decided that since he doesn't know how to love me, I'm going to love him to teach him what it looks like.
Wow.
And so we had this conversation centered around that she felt helpless pretty much with helping him recognize that he actually was in a cycle from his parents and pass it on to her, and that she had never felt love. And so that was really what we were talking about. And so hence she's in therapy. So obviously there is some stuff that has come up out of how that family dynamic was.
Absolutely. And so, there's a whole theory out there about, resiliency, and how a professor at Prairie View did a study and has done a lot of work around resiliency, how, two siblings, whether it be brother and sister, two sisters or two brothers, come from the very same background. One is really, really successful. The other one has multiple challenges. He looks at the makeup, the emotional intelligence to kind of break through that. But it's interesting. We see as we do home visits how there's a difference between siblings. Some siblings, in this one home that we visited, there was 5. Yeah, there was 5. 4 had a lot of challenges. 1 seemed to be doing really, really well. And we start asking the questions like why. And what was happening is this one particular was exposed to a lot more just because they were really musically inclined. So they were out of the house more, practicing their instrument, and so they were spared from seeing a lot of the things that that their siblings saw in the home. So it was. I mean, again, this is a lot of information that we're always able to hear and then bring back and share.
I think it's really, really important. It's really important just for everybody to not feel as if, like, someone is saying that, like, it's your fault that my kid can't read, or it's your fault that my kid like dropped out of school. Like no one is saying those things. And so the whole purpose of like just really doing this series is really to have people to take a look at their role, but also take a look at some other possible things that actually can be factors with what's happening with our families, what's happening with our education system, and like just kind of what's happening, period. Just like what is actually happening. And for everyone to stop like blaming it on this or blaming it on that, and actually start like looking in the mirror first, and then you can start looking around the room.
From what we've learned, there needs to be a call to consciousness. And I know that sounds kind of cliche, but it's also what we're talking about across the board, that it's this collective accountability. And it's through this collective accountability that we can try to come to a collective solution. But the pointing the fingers and saying that there's more of a responsibility or onus on one party than the other, no. I mean, one of the things that we have found, and this is where, as educators, and I've been in this situation, we would say, why are we receiving this student? This student is coming to us, quote unquote, broken or bad or whatever the case may be. The parents. And now, it's kind of come full circle now that I have children of my own. When we send our child to school, we're sending the best that we have, and it's collectively that we have got to work together to try to support our young people and our children. And that if we just leave it up to one entity, whether it's the school system, whether it's community groups, ultimately that's not going to work. It has got to be a collective accountability and collective responsibility.
Yes, I agree.
And that's where we find the most success.
I agree. Yes, I agree. Right, because other than that, you get individuals who are just kind of pushing back because now they're upset. So you got the defensive hat on, and they're not even hearing you that you're saying this may be one factor to the other 10 we've discovered. And so I think so. I think it's like accountability, and accountability comes with like maturity, and that comes with, in my viewpoint, it comes with experiences that have told you that, hey, like what's that like saying? Like if all fingers are kind of pointing at you, like then you need to really kind of reevaluate something about like what you're doing. So,
one of the most powerful things that we've learned, or instances that stand out, is a student named Kevin, that we did a home visit on several years ago. This is probably like 8 years ago. And Kevin was 17 years old in the 9th grade. And Kevin was consistently not doing well. He was consistently missing school, hence 17 in the 9th grade. And when we did the home visit, his grandmother, who was very old, said, obviously she was trying to do her best, that she would wake him up and send him to school every day. He just would never make it. And when we did the home visit, we asked her, were there any extenuating circumstances that we need to maybe know where we could bring that information back to the school? And the grandmother went back into her home and brought out some medicine, and she said, if someone can help me fill his medication, because he's been acting differently since his medication ran out. So we looked at the medication, and the clinician who was with me and who did a lot of home visits in 2007, 2008 with me, looked at the medication, and the medication was for diagnosed schizophrenics. And so Kevin was not making it to school because he was off his medication. And so something that's simple to try to fix, but the grandmother didn't have the means to fill the medication. Mm-hmm. Hence, that's why Kevin was wandering.
Right. I can imagine also, as you were telling that story, I just began thinking about like my time in middle school and elementary. And now I wasn't as mature as I am now. So my thinking then was, so my statement is based on that. But I remember thinking like, are you too old to be in this school? Or, you should have graduated. Like, what are you doing back here? And it was just like a lot of teasing and bullying really going on with anybody who is older. So I can imagine like that just really playing a role into a person's self-esteem and just their confidence when it comes to like feeling a part and feeling connected, and that school is important. So you got like this individual who's much older than his grade level, and who also has this double whammy, if you will, of now being on medication, probably having some symptoms. And all those things play a role into if you're going to be successful or if you're going to have some challenges along the way.
Absolutely. I agree
Okay.
100%.
I noticed that, like, on your bio it said you work with African American and Latino, like, mates, also. So do you see any difference with, like, some of the family dynamics between the both?
Yeah, the reason that we really started working with a lot of Latino males is when we started this work, it was in Baltimore and then parts of D.C. At that particular time in Baltimore, the Latino community was very segregated from the rest of Baltimore and had not really gone through the expansion that it's had in other major cities. But in Washington, D.C., when we start looking at why students were missing, there were very distinct differences to why many of our African American students were missing compared to our Latino students. And it was the cultural nuances that we were learning through our home visits. So, for example, and this was quite frankly, my ignorance in 2006, 2007 is, and I made the mistake that many educators do. I lumped all Latinos into this homogeneous group. And they're not a homogeneous group. They will tell you this, and they have told me this during the home visits, that there's clear distinctions, cultural distinctions, between El Salvadorian and Puerto Rican and Dominican, Mexican, and there's different cultural perspectives that I, as an educator, did not. I had not been trained or had not been exposed to, and it was through the home visits that we learned. So, for example, we had a large El Salvadorian population with this charter school I was working with. And as we were doing more and more home visits around attendance issues, the narrative around the El Salvadorian population at that time in 2006 was that no matter what interventions were put in place, that between the beginning of December and the middle of January to the end of January, they were going to go back to El Salvador. So no matter what we did, no matter what preventive measures we put in place, the parents would say, quite frankly, we're going back to El Salvador. They will come back to school when we return. And we learned that was kind of a part of their culture at that time. That was part of their narrative. So instead of trying to fight that portion, that part of their narrative, we simply had to think differently and say, okay, we know that you're going to be leaving for a month or 2 months in some instances. What can we do to be supportive so that your son and daughter, when they come back to school after this hiatus or after they return from El Salvador, what can we give them in the interim that they won't fall so far behind, as opposed to trying to push and say, don't take them, because we weren't going to win that. We had to figure out how to support them while they were away. And that's how we really came into understanding that we had got to be really, really different in our approach for the Latino males. A lot of the Latino students who come over, they have not received a formal education in their country of origin. So when they come over, even though they're 16, 13, 14, or 15, they may have only been in school for 1 or 2 years. So not only are they adjusting to the American culture, they're not even literate in their native language.
Which can also play a role when it comes to how the education is going to look when they actually get to the school, or how their interaction is going to be with their peers, how their relationships are going to be formed. Like, there's so many things that go into, like, play when we're talking about, like, what's happening with our communities, what's happening with our families. And so here it is, like, great example. Like, we're talking about education and literacy. We're talking about, like, this barrier, being able to feel connected just by understanding somebody's language, and so that plays a role. And you take that to school with you, you take that to relationships with you, you take that next door, and you take that outside to play with you. And people wonder, like, what's going on, or why are our communities like this? Why is there so much division? And so look at all that you just named that's actually happening with just, like, that particular culture.
Yeah, it was a great learning experience and a great humbling experience as an educator for me in my career, just saying that I made some basic false assumptions that I would always say that was made about African-American children. And I did the same exact thing to Latino students. And I learned a whole lot in those conversations in those homes. just about also about what they were afraid that there was a huge in many of the home visits that we conducted, there was a huge trust factor because they didn't know our intentions. And so they were. It took more than one home visit. It was multiple touches for them to begin to trust us, so that we could get them the support that they needed.
I think that's a really good point, just in itself, about like the trust factors. So not only like culture for the particular groups that you were seeing in their homes, but I think that's something that's a big issue overall. To be honest, like just whenever you have someone who's coming in that's in a high position like yourself, or a social worker, or any of those titles where it looks like now you're going to tell me how to run my home, or now you're going to tell me like what I need to do as
Absolutely.
a parent. I think everybody immediately goes to like the defense, and there's this wall
Absolutely.
that goes up, and you're all the enemy.
Absolutely.
And that plays a role as to like what's about to be next. Like how well am I going to receive this information to actually stop some of the things and the cycles that are actually happening. And so I definitely think that is like cross culture, unfortunately.
And that's what we experienced that as well. And that's why we just kept on going back. And the more that we would go back, and the more that we would just listen, consistently say, well, we're not prepared to do this, or we need support with that, and bringing the information back. And once we were able to break down those barriers, or once we were able to really start extending those lines of communication and trust, we were actually able to start making inroads with the supports that these families needed.
Yes. So let's see. So we have a few minutes left before the climax of the show. So let's tell our listeners, like, let's give them some different solutions. And again, this is the cap of the factors that break up families. So I really want to like put it all together and really just give them some solutions as to what they can do as the mother, as the father, as the educator, as the aunt, maybe as the guardian, to actually help rebuild some of the cycles that are actually going on that's breaking up our families and hindering kids from actually graduating college or being successful adults or parenting looking differently. So what are some things that that you may not have named that you particularly have put in place with your foundation that you've seen to be very successful?
Well, so one of the things, one of the solutions that we propose for all students and for all schools is that, and for families, is that parents or caregivers have got to be advocates for their children, for the students. And when I mean advocates, they may not have all the answers, but they can ask questions. And one of the biggest questions they can ask to the school is, what resources do you have available, whether internal or as community that you may have as community partners? Schools have a plethora of resources that parents or caregivers just don't know anything about. They have access to so many things. One of the schools that we're working with in Baltimore, or more importantly, one of the schools that we worked with in Washington, D.C., had 57 outside partners in their building. And so there were all types of resources, from mental health agencies to employment to helping whether or not, with literacy programs. It's just that sometimes parents have got to ask. They may not know specifically what to ask for, but they can say, are there resources, or who's working, who do you have a lines of communication to, or who are you working with outside your school building that maybe my son or daughter can benefit from? And so it's the advocacy where parents or caregivers can just ask the question. On the school side, we have got to make parents and caregivers feel more comfortable and less intimidated when they come into the building. A lot of times, and it's historical, whether it's what they've experienced themselves or what they've experienced with their son or daughter throughout their schooling, is that a lot of times schools are not welcoming, even though we want to be welcoming. A lot of times schools are not welcoming, and it's more intimidation, and that schools only reach out when it's bad news to give to the parents, whether their son or daughter was in trouble, their son or daughter not missed a school, didn't do well on a test. We've got to keep that communication open when positive things are happening, so that there's not this wall, this barrier where the school is, or this perception that the school is only reaching out when my son or daughter is in trouble. So I think those are the two tangible solutions. Advocacy of parents asking how can, what resources do you have available, and the schools reaching out saying these are the resources we have available, and we want to be supportive of what your son or daughter needs. It's communication on both parts.
I love those solutions, and I think a really good point and something that has been a trend across the board that each one of the guests this month have actually shared is that there's this highlight, unfortunately, of the bad performance when your child is acting up or hits somebody or got in a fight, but there's no highlight of, hey, today they actually sat down all day, or today they actually completed every single assignment without assistance. And so, like, those things actually play a role, and those things actually play a role on that child's or that young teen's self-esteem, and that in turn plays a role on their motivation.
I was in a school today, and specifically there was a group of students in a classroom, and I was just observing the school, and I started talking to them, and they said, "Are we in trouble?" Within the first 2 minutes of me just talking to them, I said, "No. Like, why do you think you're in trouble?" They said, "Well, usually when adults talk to us, we're in trouble," and that's a learned behavior.
Right. And so people eventually, so when you're a kid or a teen, you're in the midst of molding yourself. And so you're molding yourself, number one, unfortunately, first into what people believe you are. And so whatever you keep telling that kid, that's what they begin to start doing and acting like, because they're in their identity, they're molding themselves. Image is everything. How you view them is everything. And so those things actually do play a role. They really do. And so we're running out of time here, but I do want you to have a chance to actually share any last words or of encouragement to the particular audience, and also give them some of your contact information that you may have to get in touch with you or to support your foundation, just whatever you have, share with the audience.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we're learning through all this work that we're doing is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all, and that we've got to take a very eclectic approach to not just the academic part of this work, but also the emotional health of our young people, and that there is not three strikes and you're out. It's more of a collaboration and partnership. Everybody, it does sound kind of cliche, but we're all in this together. But collectively, we can try to figure out the challenges that our young people have, and then identify the supports that they need. And that's what we've been learning through this work for the past 7 years. And for anybody that needs to contact me, you can go to my website, which is concentriced.org. That's CONCENTRICED.org. Or you can contact me at on my cell phone, which is 202-330-1753. That's 202-330-1753. Again, 202-330-1753. But collectively, we can get this work done because it's needed.
Yes, I love it. I love all of your points you made, especially the last one about collectively. We cannot do any of this without our moms, our dads, our grandmothers, our teachers, our administration. Nothing can be done. All we can do is sit here and have a platform discussion, but until we all realize the vital role that we play, then we can't move. And so I love the fact that, that is something that your organization stands on. I love the fact that you stand on that. And so I know that, that program is going to continue to be successful, and more youth will be transformed, educated. Families will be transformed just from it. So I love it. So I really do thank you for just joining me. And I definitely will have you back on for one of my other series that I'll be having. So I'll keep in touch with you so you can join in on one of those series as well. And
I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for being on it. All right. So thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. Good luck and God bless on all your endeavors. Look forward to talking to you.
Thank you. So Source Nation, that was Dr. Heiber, and he said some amazing things. And so I think a lot of the take-home just from the series of factors that break up families is communication, and that it is not one-sided. There is not one thing that we can do alone, that each person has a role to play. And to actually take a look in the mirror first to see what you're doing to be held accountable, and then start looking around the room to see what the other factors are. Because we have to rebuild our families. We have to break a lot of the cycles that are going on. We have to put education back in and build up our youth and young adults. And we have to start looking at the role that we play as parents. So I definitely thank you for tuning into the series of factors that break up families. So before I go, I also want to share some contact information to get in touch with me. And as I stated before last week, if you have a quote or a poem that is centered around some of the discussions, please email it to jabryant1913@gmail.com, and I'll be glad to read yours online. And so I also can be reached via social media at Jaketra B, and that's Jaketra B for Twitter. And my website is www.b3mentalperformances.com. And so I have my poem for the day for you all. And so the one today is called The Power of Family by Anthony Smith. So family is heaven sent from our Father above, bonded by the power of love. No matter what, family has each other's back when push comes to shove. Family is understanding, never demanding, all for one and one for all. I will never leave you alone standing. Family is one in itself. My love is your love. Your pain is my pain. My wealth is your wealth. I promise to never leave you by yourself. Family is the strongest team, the strongest unit. If love could be visualized, family would be a blueprint. Family is forgiveness and patience. It's sweeter than the sweetest fragrance. The power of family is a reflection of God's compassion and magnificence. Family is never turn our back and never shamed. Lend my helping hand and not a finger pointing the blame. No matter what, a family bond can never be broken, even through a nuclear explosion. If one of us lives, we all live. Forever to eternity, we are family. My father, my mother, my sisters, and me. So again, I thank you, Source Nation family, for tuning in. And I'm your host, Jaketra Bryant.